They say you can measure the weight of a moment by how long it stays with you. By that measure, the night Caleb and I sat on the porch swing must weigh 1,000 lifetimes. It was a quiet evening, one of those endless summer nights where the air is thick with the hum of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. Alan, my husband, was away on another of his endless business trips, leaving the house to Caleb and me. I hadn't planned on sitting outside that night, but something about the stillness called to me. I found Caleb already there, sprawled on the swing with a book in his lap. He looked up as I stepped onto the porch, his dark eyes catching the soft glow of the porch light. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, his voice low and warm. I shook my head, settling onto the swing beside him. Just needed some air. We sat there for a while, the swing creaking softly as we rocked back and forth. The silence between us was comfortable at first, but as the minutes stretched on, it grew heavier, charged with an unspoken tension I didn't fully understand. And then, in a moment I still can't quite explain, the world seemed to tilt. A casual brush of his hand against mine sent a jolt through me, and when I looked at him, something shifted. Neither of us spoke as he leaned in, his lips brushing against mine in a tentative electric kiss. It was over in an instant, but it left me reeling, my heart pounding as if I'd run a marathon. I pulled away, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts, none of them coherent. Caleb's expression mirrored my own, shock, disbelief, and something deeper, something neither of us dared to name. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I stood abruptly, my legs shaky as I backed toward the door. We can't," I stammered, the words sounding hollow even to my own ears. And then I fled, leaving Caleb alone on the swing, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on me like a physical force. The memory of that kiss lingered with me, threading its way into my thoughts as I moved through the days that followed. It was as though I'd walked through a door I hadn't realized existed, and now that it was open, I couldn't close it. But that night on the porch, I wasn't thinking about doors or choices or consequences. It had just been the two of us, Evelyn and Caleb, sitting side by side in the soft, humid glow of a summer evening. The swing creaked under our combined weight, its rhythmic motion matching the tempo of the crickets in the surrounding fields. I hadn't meant to join him. He looked so content there, a book balanced on his knee, the faint glow of his phone lighting up his face now and then. But something drew me out of the house and onto the porch. Perhaps it was the quiet. Or maybe it was him. "You don't usually sit out here," Caleb said, his voice low and easy, as though he'd been waiting for me. "I needed a break," I replied, settling beside him on the swing. "Sometimes the house feels too big when your father's not here." Caleb smirked, his gaze drifting out toward the fields beyond the yard. "It always feels big to me, like it was made for someone else." I glanced at him, surprised by the weight in his tone. Caleb wasn't one to talk about feelings, he'd always been the strong, silent type, quick to crack a joke or deflect with a grin. Hearing this vulnerability in his voice caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" I asked gently. He shrugged, his fingers idly tracing the edge of the book in his lap. "I guess I've just always felt out of place. Like I don't quite fit. Dad's expectations, this house, his life, it's not really mine." His words stung, though I knew they weren't directed at me. I'd spent years trying to bridge the gap between Caleb and his father, smoothing over arguments and quietly encouraging them to connect. But I'd always suspected there was a chasm between them that I couldn't cross. "I'm sorry," I said after a moment. "I didn't realize you felt that way." He looked at me then, his dark eyes searching mine. "You've always been different, Evelyn. You're the only one who's ever really listened." There was something raw in his gaze, something that made my breath catch. I looked away, focusing on the horizon where the last traces of daylight were fading into a deep, dusky blue. "It's just how I am," I said softly, unsure of how to respond. "No, it's not," he said, his voice firmer now. "You care, even when you don't have to. That's rare." His words settled over me like a warm blanket, and for a moment I didn't know what to say. Then, as if on instinct, I reached out and placed a hand on his. The gesture was meant to be comforting, nothing more. But the moment our hands touched, the air between us shifted. The swing stopped creaking, the crickets seemed to fade, and the world narrowed to just the two of us. "Caleb," I began, but my voice faltered. He turned his hand over, his fingers brushing against mine. The touch was light, hesitant, but it sent a ripple of warmth through me. "Evelyn," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I should have pulled away. I should have stood up, gone back into the house, and pretended this moment never happened. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed there, my hand resting in his, as he leaned closer. His eyes held mine, searching for hesitation, for doubt, and when he found none, he closed the distance between us. The kiss was soft, almost imperceptible at first, as though he was giving me a chance to stop him. But I didn't. I couldn't. When his lips met mine, it was like a spark igniting something I hadn't even realized was there. The kiss was tentative and full of questions, yet it held a depth that made my heart ache. I pulled away after a moment, my breath coming in shallow gasps. "This isn't," I began, but I couldn't finish the sentence. "This isn't what?" he asked, his voice low and steady. "Wrong? Because it doesn't feel wrong." "It's not about how it feels," I said, though my own words sounded hollow. He didn't argue, didn't press me. Instead, he sat back, his eyes holding mine with a quiet intensity that made it impossible to look away. "I'm sorry," he said after a long pause. "I didn't mean to make things complicated." "It's already complicated," I replied, my voice softer than I intended. We sat in silence after that, the swing creaking softly beneath us as the night settled around us. I wanted to say something, to break the tension, but every word that came to mind felt inadequate. Eventually I stood, my legs shaky as I stepped away from the swing. "Good night, Caleb," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Good night," he replied, his tone unreadable. I didn't look back as I walked into the house, the screen door slamming shut behind me. But as I climbed the stairs to my room, I could still feel the weight of his gaze, the warmth of his hand in mine, the softness of his lips against mine. And I knew deep down that this was only the beginning. I barely slept that night. The house, usually a sanctuary of silence when Richard was away, seemed louder than ever. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside, felt like a reminder of the secret I now carried. When dawn finally broke, I dragged myself out of bed and into the kitchen, hoping the monotony of making breakfast might quiet my thoughts. But even the familiar rhythm of cracking eggs and brewing coffee couldn't stop my mind from drifting back to the porch. To Caleb. To the way his lips had felt against mine. I told myself it was just a moment of weakness, a slip in judgment fueled by loneliness and the intimacy of a quiet summer evening. But the truth was harder to admit. I'd wanted it. The sound of footsteps on the stairs pulled me from my thoughts. I turned to see Caleb entering the kitchen, his hair tousled, his t-shirt rumpled as if he'd barely slept either. "Morning," he said, his voice scratchy but warm. "Morning," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. He poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, watching me as I flipped the eggs in the skillet. His presence filled the room, and I felt the tension rise like steam from the stove. "I've been thinking about last night," he said finally, his voice soft. I froze, my hand gripping the spatula a little too tightly. "Caleb, we can't." "I know," he interrupted, his gaze steady. I don't regret it." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I turned to face him, my chest tightening as I met his eyes. "You should," I said, though my voice wavered. "Do you?" he asked, stepping closer. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. Did I regret it? I should have, but the truth lodged itself in my throat like a stone. The sound of my phone buzzing on the counter saved me from answering. I grabbed it quickly, grateful for the distraction, but the relief was short-lived when I saw the name on the screen. Miriam. Miriam had been my closest friend for years, the kind of person who could read me like an open book, no matter how hard I tried to hide. We met for coffee later that morning at the little cafe in town, and I spent the entire drive rehearsing ways to deflect her inevitable questions. She was already seated at our usual table when I arrived, her curly auburn hair pulled back into a loose ponytail. "There you are," she said with a smile. "I was starting to think you'd forgotten about me." "Never," I said, forcing a laugh as I slid into the chair across from her. She studied me for a moment, her green eyes narrowing. "You look tired. Everything okay?" "Just didn't sleep well," I said, waving a hand dismissively. "You know how it is when Richard's away. The house feels empty." Miriam tilted her head, her expression softening. "I get that. But you've been looking a little off for a while now. Is there something you're not telling me? No, I said quickly, too quickly. Her eyes narrowed again, and I cursed myself for being so transparent. But before she could press further, the waitress arrived with our drinks, and the conversation shifted to safer territory. Gossip about the neighbors, updates on Miriam's never-ending home renovation projects, and plans for the upcoming town fair. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that she saw through me. When I returned home that afternoon, the house was quiet. Caleb wasn't in the living room or the kitchen, and for a moment I thought he might have gone out. But then I heard the faint sound of music coming from the back porch. I found him there, sitting on the steps with his phone in one hand and a beer in the other. He looked up when he saw me, his expression unreadable. "Hey," he said, his voice low. "Hey," I replied, stepping onto the porch. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of the previous night hung heavy between us, an unspoken question neither of us dared to answer. Finally, Caleb broke the silence. "You're mad at me?" "No," I said quickly, though the word felt like a lie. "Then what?" he asked, turning to face me fully. I sighed, leaning against the railing. "I'm mad at myself," I admitted. "Because I should have stopped it, because I didn't." He stood then, closing the distance between us in a few steps. "It wasn't just you, Evelyn. We're both in this." His words were like a lifeline and an anchor all at once, grounding me and pulling me deeper into something I wasn't sure I could escape. "We can't," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He reached out, his fingers brushing mine. "Why not?" "Because it's wrong," I said, though the conviction in my voice was fading. "Is it?" he asked, his gaze steady. "Or are we just afraid of what people would think?" His words hung in the air, challenging everything I'd told myself to believe. I pulled my hand away, stepping back. "I need time," I said finally, my voice shaking. Caleb nodded, his expression softening. "Take all the time you need," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I replayed his words over and over in my mind. I knew what was at stake, knew the risks we were taking. But for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't even realized I was missing. Alive. And that terrified me more than anything else. The days following my conversation with Caleb passed in a strange limbo. I buried myself in routine, cleaning, gardening, running errands, anything to keep my mind from drifting back to that night on the porch. But no matter how hard I tried, the memory of his words, his touch, lingered like a song I couldn't stop humming. Caleb, for his part, seemed content to give me space. He wasn't cold or distant, but he didn't push either. It was as though we'd reached a fragile truce, both of us treading carefully around the growing tension between us. Then, one afternoon, the truce shattered. It started innocently enough. I'd decided to clean out the barn, a task I'd been putting off for months. The place was a mess of old furniture, broken tools, and cobwebs, and I was determined to make some progress before the heat of the day became unbearable. I was halfway through dragging an old rocking chair to the door when Caleb appeared in the doorway, his shadow stretching long across the dusty floor. "Need a hand?" he asked, his tone light. I straightened, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "You don't have to. I know you hate this stuff." He grinned, stepping inside. "Maybe I just wanted to keep you company." I rolled my eyes but didn't argue. Together, we worked in companionable silence, hauling out broken chairs and stacks of old magazines. The barn grew hotter as the sun climbed higher, and soon, my shirt clung to my back with sweat. "I think that's the last of it," I said, wiping my forehead as I leaned against the workbench. Caleb set down a crate of tools and turned to face me, his chest rising and falling with the effort of lifting. "You've been avoiding me," he said abruptly. The words caught me off guard. "I haven't." "You have," he interrupted, his gaze steady. "And I get it, I do. But you don't have to keep punishing yourself, Evelyn." "I'm not punishing myself," I said, though the words felt hollow. He stepped closer, his expression softening. "Then what are you doing?" I looked away, my fingers gripping the edge of the workbench. "I'm trying to figure out how to stop this before it gets any worse." "Worse," he echoed, his voice tinged with disbelief. "You make it sound like this is some kind of disaster." "Isn't it?" I asked, meeting his gaze. "You're my stepson, Caleb. This isn't normal." "Who cares about normal?" he said, his voice rising. "I care about you. Doesn't that count for something?" His words hung in the air. raw and unguarded. For a moment, all I could hear was the sound of my own breathing, the distant hum of cicadas outside. "It's not that simple," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe it is," he replied, taking another step closer. I could feel the heat radiating from his skin, the intensity of his gaze pulling me in. My heart pounded as he reached out, his hand brushing against mine. "Caleb," I began, but the rest of the words caught in my throat as he leaned in. This time, there was no hesitation. His lips found mine, with a confidence that sent a jolt through me, and before I could stop myself, I was kissing him back. The world around us seemed to blur, the dust and heat and sunlight fading into nothing as I lost myself in him. His hands were warm and steady as they settled on my waist, pulling me closer, and for a moment I forgot everything. Richard, the house, the consequences. When we finally broke apart, I was breathless, my cheeks flushed. "We can't do this," I said, though the words lacked conviction. "Yes, we can," he replied, his voice steady. "If we want to." The barn wasn't the last place. In the weeks that followed, Caleb and I found ourselves drawn together again and again, each encounter a little riskier than the last. There was the night at the cabin, when I'd gone there to clear my head and found him waiting, his presence as natural as the rustling of the trees outside. We'd spent hours talking, our voices barely above whispers, until the distance between us dissolved once more. Then there was the drive into town for groceries, when a sudden rainstorm forced us to pull over on the side of the road. The intimacy of the car, the sound of the rain pounding against the roof, created a tension so thick I could barely breathe. And then, there was the night Richard came home early. I was in the kitchen setting the table for dinner when I heard the sound of his car pulling into the driveway. My stomach dropped. It was too early for him to be home. Caleb, who'd been helping me with the dishes, froze beside me. "Did he say he was coming back today?" he asked, his voice low. "No," I whispered, my heart pounding. We moved quickly, Caleb grabbing the dish towel and retreating to the living room as I tried to compose myself. When Richard walked through the door, he looked tired but pleased, his briefcase slung over one shoulder. "Surprise," he said with a grin, leaning in to kiss my cheek. "You're home early," I said, forcing a smile. "Thought I'd take a break from the chaos," he replied, glancing into the living room. "Caleb, good to see you." "You too, Dad," Caleb said, his tone casual. The dinner that followed was one of the most excruciating experiences of my life. Every glance, every movement felt magnified, and I was painfully aware of Caleb's presence at the table. I could feel his gaze on me, even when I wasn't looking, and the weight of our secret pressed down on me like a stone. Afterward, as Richard settled into the living room with his laptop, Caleb found me in the kitchen. "That was close," he said, his voice low. "Too close," I replied, my hands trembling as I loaded the dishwasher. "We'll be more careful," he said, his hand brushing mine. "We have to stop," I whispered, though even as I said it, I knew I didn't mean it. Caleb's eyes searched mine, and he nodded slowly. "If that's what you want." But it wasn't what I wanted, and we both knew it. The trouble with secrets is they're never as hidden as you think. They have a way of seeping into the edges of your life, coloring even the most ordinary moments. I'd been careful, or at least, I thought I had. But the evening Miriam confronted me, I realized how much I'd underestimated her. It was a weeknight, and Miriam had stopped by unannounced, carrying a bottle of wine and a plate of cookies she'd made for some church fundraiser. Richard had gone to bed early, and Caleb was out on one of his late-night drives, leaving the house quiet and still. "Thought you could use some company," Miriam said cheerfully as she set the plate on the counter. I forced a smile, my heart already racing. "Always. Let me grab some glasses." We settled in the living room, the wine between us, and for a while the conversation was easy. She told me about her ongoing feud with the HOA, about the new couple who'd moved in down the street, about her daughter's upcoming wedding. But then her tone shifted, her eyes narrowing slightly as she leaned forward. "Evelyn," she said, her voice quieter now, "can I ask you something?" My stomach tightened. "Of course." "It's about Caleb," she said, watching me closely. I froze, the wine glass halfway to my lips. "What about him?" Miriam hesitated, her gaze searching mine. "It's probably nothing, but the other day at the grocery store I saw the two of you. And..." She trailed off, her expression hard to read. "And what?" I prompted, my voice steadier than I felt. She leaned back, sighing. It's just, you seemed close. I mean, I know you're close, but this felt different. The room seemed to close in around me, the walls pressing closer with every word. I forced a laugh, shaking my head. Miriam, you're imagining things. Caleb and I were just running errands. Maybe, she said, though her tone suggested she didn't believe me. But I know you, Evelyn, and I know when something's not right. I set my glass down, my hands trembling. There's nothing to worry about, I said firmly. Miriam studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. If you say so. But the doubt in her eyes lingered, and I knew the conversation was far from over. That night, I found Caleb in the garage, leaning against the hood of his car with his arms crossed. He looked up as I approached, his expression softening when he saw the tension in my face. What happened? He asked, straightening. Miriam, I said simply. His jaw tightened. What did she say? She saw us at the store, I said, my voice low. She thinks something's going on. Caleb's brow furrowed and he stepped closer, his hand brushing mine. What did you tell her? I denied everything, I said, my voice trembling, but she doesn't believe me. He exhaled sharply, his fingers tightening around mine. Evelyn, it's gonna be okay. I pulled away, pacing the length of the garage. No, it's not. If Miriam suspects something, it's only a matter of time before Richard does too. Then let's leave, he said suddenly. I froze, turning to face him. What? Let's leave, he repeated, his voice steady. We'll go somewhere else, start over. His words sent a pang through me, of longing, of fear, of something I couldn't quite name. Caleb, that's not possible. I can't just leave. Why not? He asked, his voice rising. Because of Richard? Because of what people might think? Because of everything, I said, my voice breaking. My life is here, Caleb, my whole life. His expression softened, and he stepped closer, his hands settling on my shoulders. What kind of life is it if you're not happy? I didn't have an answer. The turning point came 2 days later, during a storm that rolled in unexpectedly, bringing sheets of rain and howling winds. Richard was out at a business dinner, leaving Caleb and me alone in the house. I was in the living room, staring out the window at the rain pounding against the glass, when Caleb found me. You're thinking about leaving, aren't you? He said, his voice soft. I turned to face him, my chest tightening. I don't know what I'm thinking. He crossed the room, his presence grounding me even as my thoughts swirled in 1,000 directions. You're scared, he said, his voice steady. Of course I'm scared, I said, my voice cracking. This isn't a game, Caleb. This is my life. Your life. He stepped closer, his eyes holding mine. Then let's make it our life. His words were like a lifeline, pulling me back from the edge. And for the first time in weeks, I let myself imagine it. A life where the secrets and lies were gone, where I didn't have to look over my shoulder or second-guess every moment. But the image was fleeting, a dream that dissolved as quickly as it formed. I can't, I said, tears welling in my eyes. Caleb's expression softened and he reached out, his hand brushing my cheek. I'm not giving up on you, Evelyn. Not ever. The storm raged on outside, the rain lashing against the windows like a warning. But in that moment, I felt a fragile sense of peace, a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way through the storm together. The storm outside had faded by morning, leaving behind a world that felt strangely washed clean. But inside me, the turmoil raged on. Caleb stayed out late that night, likely driving aimlessly like he often did when he needed to think. By the time I woke up, his car was back in the driveway, and the house was silent again. Richard had already left for the office, and the weight of the day pressed down on me as I stood in the kitchen, staring out at the rain-soaked yard. I'd made coffee, but I couldn't bring myself to drink it. My hands were trembling too much, my thoughts looping endlessly through the same questions, the same impossible choices. When Caleb appeared in the doorway, his hair tousled and his t-shirt wrinkled, the sight of him sent a pang through my chest. He was holding something in his hands, a letter. "Morning," he said, his voice low. "Morning," I replied, though the word came out hollow. He hesitated, his eyes searching mine. Then he crossed the room and set the letter on the counter in front of me. "What's this?" I asked, my heart skipping a beat. "It's for you," he said simply. I picked up the envelope, my fingers brushing against the edge. It wasn't sealed, and when I opened it, I found a single piece of paper inside, written in Caleb's unmistakable scrawl. Evelyn, I meant every word I've said. About you. About us. And I know this is the hardest thing you've ever had to face, but I also know you. You're stronger than you think, braver than you realize. If you want to walk away, I'll let you. But if there's even a part of you that wants this, wants me, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Caleb, my hands shook as I read it, the words blurring through the tears that welled in my eyes. I looked up at him, but he wasn't watching me. His gaze was fixed on the window, his jaw tight. Why are you giving me this? I asked, my voice trembling. Because I need you to know, he said, turning to face me. No matter what you decide, I need you to know how I feel. I set the letter down carefully, my chest tight. Caleb, this isn't easy for me. I know, he said softly. The air between us was heavy, thick with all the things we couldn't say. I wanted to tell him I felt the same, that I wanted him as much as he wanted me, but the words caught in my throat. I don't want to ruin your life, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. You won't, he replied. But you might ruin yours if you keep pretending this doesn't matter. That evening, Richard came home early, his mood unusually cheerful. He poured himself a glass of wine and talked about his latest deal, oblivious to the tension that hung in the room. Caleb was quiet, offering polite responses but nothing more. I, meanwhile, could barely look at either of them. When dinner was over, Richard retreated to his office, leaving Caleb and me alone in the kitchen. The silence between us was unbearable, and I could feel his eyes on me as I loaded the dishwasher with trembling hands. Evelyn, he said quietly. I didn't turn around. Don't, I whispered. But he didn't listen. I felt him step closer, his hand brushing lightly against my arm. I'm not trying to push you, he said softly. I need to know where we stand. I turned to face him then, my heart pounding. His expression was open, vulnerable, and it broke something in me. We can't keep doing this, I said, my voice shaking. Why not? He asked, his tone steady. Because it's too much, I replied, tears threatening to spill. The lies, the secrecy, the risk, it's too much. He reached out, his hand cupping my cheek. Do you love me? The question caught me off guard, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. Yes, I admitted, the word barely audible. Then that's all that matters, he said, his voice fierce. It's not that simple, I said, pulling away. Maybe it is, he replied, his gaze steady. Maybe we just need to stop being afraid. That night I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Richard was asleep beside me, his breathing deep and even, but my thoughts were anything but calm. I thought about Caleb's letter, about his words, about the way he'd looked at me with such certainty. And for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a different life. One where I didn't have to hide, where I could be with him without fear or shame. But as much as I wanted that life, I knew it wasn't possible. Not here. Not now. When morning came, I found Caleb in the kitchen, his bag packed and slung over one shoulder. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable. You're leaving? I asked, my voice catching. He nodded. For now, I think we both need some space. I swallowed hard, my chest tightening. Where will you go? Does it matter? He asked gently. Yes, I said, my voice breaking. He stepped closer, his hand brushing mine. I'll be back, when you're ready. I nodded, unable to speak, and then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Months later, I still think about that summer, about the choices I made and the ones I didn't, about Caleb and the way he made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know this. Some moments leave marks that never fade, and Caleb is one of those moments. The first time he saw me naked, it wasn't romantic. It wasn't planned, either. I was in the back office of my real estate firm, peeling off my sweaty blouse after a long day of showings. The summer heat was merciless, and the office AC had been on the fritz for days. I had been careful to lock the door, at least I thought I had. I heard the creak of the handle just as I unhooked my bra straps. I froze, my back half turned, and that's when I saw him. Evan, the intern. The guy I'd only just started to notice in a way I shouldn't have. He stood there, his face going crimson, his hand gripping the door handle like he wasn't sure whether to pull it closed or apologize. I could tell he was trying not to look, but his wide eyes betrayed him. Sorry. Oh God. Sorry, he stammered, backing away. I should have said something, anything, but I didn't. I just stood there, shirtless, clutching my blouse to my chest as my own embarrassment battled something else. Something that made my skin prickle and my breath hitch. When the door clicked shut, I sat down on the edge of my desk, heart racing. I told myself it was just the shock of being caught off guard, that the heat and exhaustion were playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. It wasn't the first time I'd felt the flutter of excitement when Evan was near. That moment changed everything. It was the spark that lit the fire I thought I'd lost years ago. And I wasn't ready for how quickly it would consume me. I wasn't always this person, this woman who felt like she was floating in a sea of her own life, unsure of where she was headed. In my 20s, I had direction, confidence. I was the kind of woman who turned heads when I walked into a room. Not because of what I wore or how I looked, but because of how I carried myself. I had fire, ambition, certainty. At 52, most of that felt like a distant memory. The divorce had drained it out of me. It wasn't messy, not in the way you hear about with screaming matches and slashed tires. No, ours had ended with a whimper. A soft acknowledgement that whatever spark had brought us together 2 decades ago was long gone. There was no infidelity, no betrayal, just the slow, suffocating realization that we were better off apart. The settlement left me the house and the car. My ex-husband moved on, started dating a woman closer to our daughter's age than his own. And me? I poured myself into my work. Real estate wasn't my passion, but it paid the bills and gave me purpose. I'd built a solid reputation in the community as a no-nonsense professional who got results. My colleagues respected me and my clients trusted me. It was enough until the nights came. Nights were the hardest. The silence pressed in, heavy and relentless, a reminder of everything I'd lost and everything I'd never have again. I tried filling the void with Netflix, wine, and the occasional book club meeting, but it never worked. The loneliness was always there, lurking in the background. It was during one of those nights, after my second glass of wine, that I downloaded Tinder. I'd heard about it from my younger colleagues, stories of swiping left and right, of hookups and quick flings. At first, I told myself I was just curious. I wanted to see what the fuss was about, to feel connected to something, even if it was just an app. I didn't expect anything to come of it. The profiles were as disappointing as I'd imagined. Men my age who looked tired and worn out, or boys who seemed more interested in their gym routines than in actual conversation. I swiped left more times than I could count. And then, there he was. His name was Evan. His picture wasn't flashy, just him standing by a lake, wearing a plain t-shirt and jeans. There was something disarmingly genuine about his smile, the way it reached his eyes. His bio read, "Figuring life out one day at a time. Big fan of good conversations and bad pizza." It made me laugh. I almost swiped left out of habit. What could I possibly have in common with a 25-year-old? But something stopped me. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was the way his picture made me feel a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. Before I could overthink it, I swiped right. It was a match. I didn't expect him to message me. And yet, less than an hour later, there it was. "So what's the best pizza topping, and why is it pepperoni?" It was a silly, harmless opener, but it made me laugh. Before I knew it, I was typing back, telling him I preferred mushrooms and olives, and we were off. Our conversations were light, easy. He told me about finishing college, about how he wasn't sure what he wanted to do with his life yet. He was working part-time to pay the bills while he figured it out. I told him about my career, about how much I loved the challenge of real estate. Not once did he bring up our age difference, and I found myself relaxing, letting the walls I'd built around me start to crack. The messages turned into a daily habit. I'd wake up to a good morning text from him, and we'd spend the day exchanging little updates about our lives. He made me laugh more than I had in years, and for the first time in a long time, I felt noticed. Then came the shock. It was a Monday morning, and I was running late to the office. I barely had time to grab my coffee before heading to a team meeting. I walked in, flustered, and there he was. Evan, sitting at one of the desks. He looked up, smiled, and gave me a little wave. For a moment I thought I was hallucinating. My colleague Cheryl quickly filled in the blanks. "That's my nephew Evan," she said, beaming with pride. "He's helping us out for the summer while he figures out his next step." Isn't he adorable? Adorable wasn't the word I'd use. Standing there in the fluorescent light of the office, Evan looked just as good, if not better, than his Tinder profile. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a kind of casual confidence that made him seem older than his 25 years. I felt my stomach drop. Did he know? Did he recognize me? My Tinder profile didn't have my last name, but my face was right there. If he did, he didn't let on. Over the next few weeks, I told myself to keep things professional. I avoided being alone with him whenever I could, but it wasn't easy. Cheryl assigned him to assist me with a few listings, which meant long hours spent together at open houses, client meetings, and late nights in the office. And that's when I started noticing the little things. The way his eyes lingered on me during meetings, like he was studying me. The way he'd find excuses to ask me questions about properties, even when Cheryl was right there. The way he'd smile when I walked into the room, like he knew something I didn't. It all came to a head one night. We were the last ones in the office, finishing up paperwork for an open house the next day. Around 8 p.m., he suggested ordering pizza. We sat at my desk, eating greasy slices and sipping on cheap red wine someone had left in the office fridge. The conversation was easy, comfortable. We laughed about the terrible staging at one of the listings, swapped stories about our worst clients. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't invisible. And then, it happened. I excused myself to grab something from the storage room. The summer heat had been unbearable all day and the office AC wasn't working. On impulse, I slipped off my blouse, leaving me in just my bra and slacks. It wasn't something I normally would have done, but the wine had loosened me up, and I figured no one else was around. Except I was wrong. I heard the door creak open behind me, and turned just in time to see Evan standing there, his eyes wide, his face flushed. Neither of us said anything. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Then finally, he stammered, I'm so sorry, and backed out of the room, pulling the door shut behind him. I stood there, clutching my blouse, my heart pounding in my chest. Part of me wanted to be furious at him, at myself, at the situation. But another part of me, a deeper part, felt something else. Excitement. And I wasn't sure I wanted it to stop. The next morning, I woke up still thinking about the storage room incident. My first instinct was to brush it off, pretend it hadn't happened. I told myself it was a moment of embarrassment, nothing more. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the memory of his face. His wide eyes, the way his jaw tensed, the way his gaze had lingered for just a second too long before he bolted out of the room. I went to work that day prepared to act like nothing had happened. Evan did the same, to his credit. He greeted me with a polite, almost shy smile and went about his tasks like everything was normal. But there was something different between us now, an unspoken tension that hung in the air every time we were in the same room. That tension only grew as the days went on. It was the little things that tipped me off. The way his fingers would brush mine when he handed me paperwork. The way he seemed to find excuses to linger at my desk, asking questions that didn't really need answers. And then, there were the glances. Those quick, fleeting looks when he thought I wasn't paying attention. I tried to tell myself it was all in my head. That I was imagining things, projecting my own feelings onto him. But deep down, I knew better. It all came to a head a week later. We had an open house scheduled for one of my listings, a modest 3-bedroom in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It was a late showing, scheduled for 7 p.m. to accommodate a client who worked odd hours. By the time we wrapped up, it was almost 9, and the summer sun was just starting to dip below the horizon. As we packed up the last of the marketing materials, I caught Evan watching me again. This time, he didn't look away when I met his gaze. Instead, he held it, his expression unreadable but intense. "Good showing," he said, his voice quiet. I nodded, trying to keep my tone professional. "Yeah, I think they're interested." There was a pause, the kind that stretched just a little too long. I felt my pulse quicken, my palms growing clammy as the tension between us became almost unbearable. "Do you need a ride back to the office?" I asked, more to break the silence than anything else. He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah. My car's still there." We loaded the last of the supplies into my trunk and climbed into the front seats. The drive back was quiet, the air between us thick with something I couldn't name. I tried to focus on the road, on the soft hum of the engine, but all I could think about was him sitting just a few inches away. When we pulled into the office parking lot, it was nearly empty, the building dark, except for the faint glow of the security lights. I put the car in park and turned to him, forcing a smile. "Here we are." He didn't move. For a moment, I thought he was going to say something, but instead, he just looked at me. Really looked at me, his eyes searching mine, like he was trying to figure something out. "I can't stop thinking about you," he said finally, his voice low and steady. The words hit me like a jolt of electricity. For a second, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. "Evan," I started, but he cut me off. "No, let me say this," he said, leaning forward slightly. "I know it's probably crazy, and I know you might not feel the same way, but I can't keep pretending like nothing's happening here. I see the way you look at me. I feel it every time we're in the same room." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. He was right, of course. I'd been trying to deny it, to push it down, but there was no denying the truth anymore. "I shouldn't," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. This isn't a good idea?" He smiled just a little. "Maybe not, but it doesn't change the fact that I want you, and I think you want me too." Before I could stop myself, I leaned toward him, my body moving on instinct. Our lips met, tentative at first, like we were testing the waters. But the moment his hand brushed the side of my face, all the hesitation melted away. The kiss deepened, years of longing and suppressed desire flooding to the surface. His hands moved to my waist, pulling me closer as I reached up to tangle my fingers in his hair. It was messy and frantic, and everything I hadn't realized I'd been craving. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a small voice was screaming at me to stop, to think about what I was doing. But I couldn't. I didn't want to. "I've wanted this for so long," he murmured against my lips, his breath warm and ragged. I didn't respond, couldn't. Instead, I let him guide me, his hands roaming my body with a hunger that matched my own. We didn't make it out of the car. The seats were cramped, the air thick with the scent of sweat and leather, but none of it mattered. The world outside ceased to exist as we lost ourselves in each other. His touch was firm yet gentle, his movements confident yet cautious, like he was afraid of breaking me. When it was over, we sat in silence, our breathing heavy and uneven. I stared out the window, my mind racing with 1,000 conflicting thoughts. "We shouldn't have done that," I said finally, breaking the silence. He turned to me, his expression soft but serious. "Do you regret it?" I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. "No," I admitted. "But that doesn't mean it was right." He reached for my hand, his fingers brushing mine. "Maybe not, but sometimes the right thing isn't what we need." I didn't know how to respond to that. Part of me wanted to push him away, to put an end to whatever this was before it could spiral out of control. But another part of me, a deeper, more desperate part, wanted to hold on to him, to the way he made me feel. Alive, desired, seen. As I drove him home that night, I told myself it was a one-time thing, a moment of weakness that wouldn't happen again. But deep down, I knew better. This was just the beginning. I told myself it wouldn't happen again. That what Evan and I had done in the parking lot was a fleeting moment of weakness, a crossing of boundaries that would never be repeated. But that resolve didn't last long. In the days that followed, I found myself drawn to him in ways I couldn't explain, couldn't resist. It wasn't just physical, although that was part of it. It was the way he looked at me, like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. Our dynamic at the office became complicated. We tried to act normal, pretending that nothing had changed, but the tension was palpable. Every time I caught his eye, every time his hand brushed mine as we worked side by side, I felt the pull, the undeniable magnetism between us. It wasn't long before we gave in again. It happened during an open house. The property was a sleek, modern home in an upscale neighborhood, the kind of listing that practically sold itself. We were supposed to be there for a few hours, showing the place to a handful of prospective buyers. But by the time the last couple left, it was just the two of us in the empty house. I was in the kitchen, tidying up the brochures and business cards, when I felt him behind me. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, close enough that I could feel the heat of his body. "You've been avoiding me," he said finally, his voice low. I froze, my hands gripping the edge of the counter. "I'm not avoiding you," I said, though we both knew it was a lie. He stepped closer, his chest brushing against my back. "You are. And I get it. I know this isn't easy for you." I turned to face him, my breath hitching as I met his eyes. There was no judgment there, no frustration, just understanding and a quiet determination that made my knees weak. "Evan, this is complicated," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know," he said, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear. His touch was gentle, almost reverent. "But I can't stop thinking about you. About us." I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. Before I could gather my thoughts, he leaned in, his lips brushing mine in a kiss that was soft, tentative, and full of promise. This time, I didn't resist. The kitchen counter became our sanctuary, the cool marble contrasting with the heat of our bodies. His hands found my waist, pulling me closer as my fingers tangled in his hair. The rest of the world fell away, leaving only us, lost in the intensity of the moment. After that day, everything changed. Our relationship went from hesitant and uncertain to all-consuming. We started finding excuses to be alone together. Late nights at the office, long drives to showings, even lunch breaks spent in the quiet corners of the city. One of our favorite spots became a small, out-of-the-way cafe tucked into a side street downtown. It was quiet and unassuming, the kind of place where no one would think to look for us. We'd sit in the back corner, sipping coffee and talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his plans to travel, the places he wanted to see and the things he wanted to do. I told him about my daughter, about how proud I was of her even though we didn't talk as much as we used to. Those moments were precious, a reminder that what we had wasn't just physical. It was more than that, deeper, more intimate. Of course, it wasn't long before the cracks started to show. The secrecy of our relationship was exhilarating at first, but it also came with its challenges. We had to be careful, constantly looking over our shoulders to make sure no one at the office suspected anything. One afternoon, Cheryl, the same Cheryl who'd introduced Evan to the team, pulled me aside in the break room. "You've been spending a lot of time with Evan lately," she said, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. I forced a laugh, hoping it didn't sound as nervous as I felt. "Well, he's a quick learner. It's nice to have someone so eager to help out." She nodded, but the look she gave me lingered longer than I was comfortable with. "Just be careful," she said finally. "You know how people talk." That conversation stayed with me, a constant reminder of the fine line we were walking. But no matter how risky it felt, I couldn't stay away from him. The next time things escalated, it was at a listing outside the city, a secluded lake house nestled in the woods. The property was beautiful, all glass walls and open spaces, with a deck that overlooked the water. We were there to set up for a weekend showing, arriving late in the afternoon to prepare the house for potential buyers. By the time we finished, the sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow over the lake. "You should see the view from the deck," Evan said, his voice full of quiet excitement. I followed him outside, the cool evening air a welcome relief after the heat of the day. The water shimmered in the fading light, the surface smooth and undisturbed. "It's beautiful," I said, leaning against the railing. "So are you," he replied, his voice soft. I turned to him, my heart skipping a beat at the intensity in his eyes. Before I could respond, he closed the distance between us, his lips capturing mine in a kiss that was slow and deliberate. The deck became our stage, the lake and the setting sun our witnesses. His hands found the small of my back, pulling me closer as my body pressed against his. The world around us blurred, the quiet hum of nature fading into the background as we lost ourselves in each other. Every time we were together, I told myself it would be the last time. That we couldn't keep doing this, couldn't keep risking everything for the sake of our desires. But every time I found myself drawn back to him, unable to resist the pull. It wasn't just about the physical connection, although that was part of it. It was the way he made me feel, like I was the only thing that mattered, like I was worth something. Still, the guilt lingered. It crept in during the quiet moments, whispering doubts and fears into my ear. What would people think if they found out? What would Cheryl say? And yet, even as the guilt gnawed at me, I couldn't bring myself to end it. Not when being with Evan felt so right. So intoxicating. The next turning point came during a company event. A casual dinner party hosted at a local restaurant to celebrate a successful quarter. Everyone from the office was there, dressed in their best, laughter and conversation filling the air. Evan and I were careful to keep our distance, sitting at opposite ends of the table and avoiding any interactions that might draw suspicion. But even from across the room, I could feel his eyes on me, a silent reminder of everything we couldn't say or do. As the night went on, the tension grew unbearable. I excused myself to the restroom, hoping a moment alone would help me clear my head. But when I stepped into the hallway, Evan was there waiting. "We can't keep doing this," I said, my voice trembling. "I know," he replied, stepping closer. "But that doesn't mean I'm gonna stop." And just like that, all the resolve I'd built up crumbled. By the time the dinner party ended, I was a mess of emotions. Guilt, desire, fear. They all swirled inside me, pulling me in different directions. As I drove home that night, I couldn't stop thinking about him, about us, about everything we'd done and everything we still wanted to do. This wasn't just an affair anymore. It was something deeper, something I couldn't walk away from, even if I wanted to. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. Every affair eventually reaches a breaking point. Ours wasn't any different. The secrecy, the stolen moments, the thrill of being together, it all felt intoxicating at first, but with every encounter, the stakes grew higher. The guilt I'd managed to keep at bay began creeping in during the quiet moments, making me question everything. And for Evan, the excitement of what we shared started giving way to frustration. The cracks first appeared during a quiet Friday afternoon at the office. Cheryl had asked me to review some paperwork with Evan, and we ended up alone in the conference room, the blinds half closed to block out the summer sun. "What's going on with you?" he asked abruptly, setting the stack of documents down on the table. I blinked, caught off guard by the sudden shift in his tone. "What do you mean?" "You've been distant," he said, his voice low but firm. "Ever since the lake house, you've been pulling away." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Evan, this isn't easy for me. Do you know how many ways this could blow up in our faces? If Cheryl or anyone else finds out." "They won't," he interrupted. "We've been careful." "Have we?" I shot back, my voice sharper than I intended. "We're not invisible, Evan. People are starting to notice. Cheryl already made a comment about how much time we're spending together." He frowned, leaning back in his chair. "So what are you saying? That we should stop?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. The truth was, I didn't know what I was saying. I didn't want to end things with him, but I couldn't shake the fear that we were heading toward disaster. "I'm saying we need to be more careful," I said finally, my voice softening. "This isn't just a fling for me, Evan, but I can't afford to lose everything I've worked for." His expression softened, and he reached across the table to take my hand. "I don't want to lose you," he said quietly. "But I need to know that this isn't just about the risk for you. I need to know that you care about me as much as I care about you." I looked down at our hands, his fingers warm and steady against mine. "I do care," I admitted. "More than I should." The following week, the whispers started. It was subtle at first, a lingering glance from Cheryl, a knowing smirk from one of the younger agents. But it didn't take long for the rumors to gain momentum. "Have you heard about Claire and the intern?" I overheard one of the receptionists whispering in the break room. "Apparently they're spending a lot of time together after hours." My stomach twisted as I ducked out of sight, my heart pounding. I had known this would happen eventually, but hearing it out loud made it all feel too real. That evening, I called Evan, my voice tight with anxiety. "We need to talk." He came over to my house, his expression concerned as he stepped inside. "What's going on?" "People are starting to talk," I said, pacing the living room. "If this gets back to Cheryl—" "Claire, stop," he interrupted, taking my hands to still me. "We knew this wasn't going to be easy, but I'm not going to let some office gossip scare me away from you." His words were reassuring, but they didn't erase the knot of fear in my chest. As if the rumors weren't enough, Evan dropped another bombshell on me a few days later. We were sitting in my car after another late-night showing, the air between us heavy with unspoken tension. "I've been thinking about leaving the office," he said abruptly, his gaze fixed on the dashboard. I blinked, caught off guard. Leaving? Why? He hesitated, running a hand through his hair. I'd been offered a job in Seattle. It's not much, but it's a step in the right direction. My stomach sank. Seattle was over 1,000 miles away. If he took the job, whatever we had would be over. When did this happen? I asked, my voice tight. A few weeks ago, he admitted. I didn't want to tell you until I'd made up my mind. And have you? He turned to look at me, his expression conflicted. I don't know. Part of me wants to stay here for you, but another part of me knows I can't keep putting my life on hold. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to tell him to stay, to promise that we could make this work, but I knew it wouldn't be fair. Evan, you have to do what's right for you, I said finally, my voice breaking. I don't want to be the reason you give up an opportunity. He reached for my hand, his grip firm. You're not just a reason, Claire. You're the reason. The tension between us came to a head one night after another company event. We'd been careful to keep our distance during the party, but the moment we were alone in the parking lot, everything spilled out. This isn't sustainable, I said, my voice trembling with frustration. We're fooling ourselves if we think we can keep this up. So what are you saying? He demanded, his voice sharp. That we should just end it? Pretend like none of this ever happened? I don't know, I snapped, tears welling in my eyes. I don't know what the right thing to do is anymore. All I know is that I can't keep living with this constant fear. He ran a hand through his hair, his jaw tight. You think this is easy for me? You think I don't know the risks? But I'm here, Claire. I'm here because I want you, because I care about you. And I'm tired of feeling like I'm the only one who's willing to fight for this. His words cut deep, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. I do care, I said finally, my voice breaking. But I'm scared, Evan. I'm scared of what people will think, of what this could cost me. He stepped closer, his expression softening. Then tell me what you want, Claire. Do you want me to stay? Do you want us to figure this out together? Or do you want me to walk away? I stared at him, my heart pounding. I knew I had to make a choice, but the weight of it felt unbearable. That night, I lay awake, replaying our argument over and over in my mind. His words echoed in my head. Do you want me to stay? I thought about the life I'd built, the career I'd worked so hard to maintain. But I also thought about Evan, the way he made me feel, the way he looked at me like I was the only thing that mattered. In the end, I knew there was no easy answer. But one thing was clear. I couldn't imagine my life without him. The next morning, I called him. Can we talk? I asked, my voice shaky. He didn't hesitate. I'll be there in 10 minutes. When he arrived, I didn't waste any time. I want you to stay, I said, my voice firm despite the tears in my eyes. I don't know how we're going to make this work, but I know I can't let you go. His face softened and he pulled me into his arms. We'll figure it out, he murmured. Together. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I wasn't ready to let him go. I thought asking him to stay would bring clarity, a sense of relief that we'd finally made a choice. But it didn't. If anything, it made things more complicated. In the days that followed, Evan seemed lighter, more relaxed, as if a weight had been lifted. He'd made his decision. He was staying. But for me, the knot in my chest only tightened. It wasn't that I didn't want him in my life. I did. Desperately. But now that the immediate threat of him leaving was gone, I couldn't stop thinking about everything else. The rumors at work, Cheryl's sharp gaze, the ever-present risk of being discovered. Even as we spent more time together, sneaking moments in the shadows of our lives, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were living on borrowed time. One evening, a week after our decision, we met at my house after work. It had become a rare treat, our safe haven where we could be ourselves without the fear of prying eyes. I made dinner, something simple, a pasta dish with a bottle of red wine to share. We sat at the kitchen table, the soft glow of the overhead light casting warm shadows on his face. I'm glad I stayed, he said, breaking the comfortable silence. I looked up from my glass of wine, studying him. He looked so young, so full of life, and for a moment, I wondered if I'd made a mistake. Not in asking him to stay, but in tying him to me, someone with so much more baggage, so many more years behind me than ahead. Are you really? I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. He reached across the table, taking my hand in his. Of course I am, he said, his eyes sincere. You make me happy, Claire. Don't doubt that. I tried to smile, but it felt hollow. I wanted to believe him, but the doubts gnawed at me, refusing to let go. The turning point came a few days later, at an open house for one of our high-end listings. It was a busy afternoon, with clients coming and going, and Cheryl had decided to drop by unannounced to help out. Evan and I had been careful, keeping our interactions strictly professional and public. But that day, in the chaos of the showing, we slipped. I was in the kitchen, rearranging a platter of hors d'oeuvres, when Evan walked in. He stood a little too close, his arm brushing mine as he reached for a glass of water. It was such a small gesture, so innocuous, but it sent a jolt of electricity through me. You're going to get us caught, I whispered, my voice teasing but laced with genuine fear. He smirked, leaning in just enough that his breath tickled my ear. You love the risk. I was about to respond when Cheryl walked in. The look on her face froze me in place. She didn't say anything, but her eyes flicked between us, her expression unreadable. Everything okay in here? She asked finally, her tone casual but her gaze sharp. Fine, I said quickly, stepping back. Just making sure everything's in order. She nodded, but the moment lingered, heavy and charged. I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew, or at least suspected, what was happening. That evening, as I sat alone in my living room, the weight of everything came crashing down. The fear, the guilt, the constant anxiety. It was too much. For the first time since this all began, I let myself think about what would happen if we got caught. I could lose everything. My career, my reputation, the life I'd spent years rebuilding after my divorce. It could all come crumbling down. And what about Evan? He was young, with his whole life ahead of him. Was I being selfish, holding him back from opportunities he might never have if he stayed here with me? When he called later that night, I almost didn't answer. But I knew I couldn't avoid this conversation forever. I've been thinking, I said as soon as I picked up, about us, about everything. He was quiet for a moment. That doesn't sound good, I sighed, closing my eyes. I don't know if we can keep doing this, Evan. The risks, they're too high. Claire, he said, his voice steady but tinged with sadness. We've talked about this. I know the risks, and I'm willing to take them, for you. And what if it all falls apart? I asked, my voice breaking. What if we get caught? What if you end up resenting me for everything you gave up? I won't, he said firmly. I could never resent you, but if you're telling me you don't want this anymore, that you don't want me. It's not that, I interrupted, my throat tight. I do want you. But I'm scared, Evan. That's scared of losing everything. Scared of losing you. You won't lose me, he said softly. Not unless you push me away. In the end, we didn't come to a decision that night. The conversation ended with more questions than answers, both of us hesitant to let go but unsure of how to move forward. The next few weeks were a blur of stolen moments and quiet doubts. We continued seeing each other, but the weight of everything hung over us, unspoken but ever present. One night, as we lay tangled together in my bed, Evan broke the silence. Do you ever think about what this could be like if things were different? He asked, his voice soft. I didn't answer right away, my fingers tracing lazy circles on his chest. All the time, I admitted. He sighed, pulling me closer. I wish we didn't have to hide. I wish we could just be. Me too, I whispered, my voice heavy with longing. But wishing wouldn't change reality. The last time we were together, it wasn't planned. He showed up at my house late one evening, his face tense and his hands shoved into his pockets. I needed to see you, he said simply. I let him in, and we spent the night talking, laughing, making love like it was the first time all over again. But when the sun rose the next morning, something had shifted. As he got dressed, he turned to me, his expression unreadable. I've been offered the job in Seattle again, he said quietly. They called yesterday. My heart sank. And? I think I'm going to take it, he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I think it's time. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. You're right, it is. We didn't say goodbye, not really. He kissed me one last time, slow and tender, and then he was gone. It's been 6 months since Evan left. Cheryl mentioned once that he'd sent her a postcard from Seattle, but I didn't ask for details. Sometimes when I'm alone in the office late at night, I think about him. about us, about everything we shared and everything we lost. I don't regret it, not a single moment. He reminded me of what it felt like to be alive, to be seen, to be desired. And while our time together was fleeting, it was real. Some nights, I still dream about him. In those dreams, we're back at the lake house, the sun setting over the water, and for a moment, everything feels perfect again. And then I wake up, the memory fading like the last rays of sunlight. Life goes on. But a part of me will always wonder what could have been.